welcome to the first brown bag session of our talks commemorating the territorial exhibit on Arkansas that's out in the lobby. So if you haven't seen that yet, take advantage of your time here today after the program and check that out. We actually have all three of the brown bag speakers in the room today. So before I introduce today's speaker, I will tantalize you with next week's speaker, who is Professor Billy Higgins, right here, and then yours truly will finish it up the following Wednesday, and then that'll kind of wrap things up for us. But it's a pleasure to see all of you today, and I hope you're going to enjoy the program. I know you will. I've got to say a few things about this young lady, because many moons ago, I was sitting in an office about the size of that screen right there in the Gardner building. It was more like a closet than an office. Brand new professor here, and advising students and trying to get people interested in history and specifically interpreting it rather than teaching it. And we were training future park rangers and museum personnel in a program here that we used to have. And Catherine walked in my door and sat down on my little sofa that was in that little bitty space, and said, "You know, I really don't like my major. I'm thinking about changing it." And I said, "Do you like history?" "Uh-huh." And I said, "What's your background?" She said, "Well, I'm actually Cherokee." I said, "Oh, you would be a great candidate for this program." And so I challenged her that day to give it a look, and she did, and she signed on, and she graduated from UA Fort Smith with a degree in historical interpretation. And fast forward to post-graduation, she got hired very quickly by the National Park Service and worked for a brief little amount of time at Fort Smith National Historic Site, where she caught the eye of the chief of the Cherokee Nation, I believe. That is kind of how that worked. And so he lured her away. I can relate to being lured away from one job to another. And she got lured away from the National Park Service to work on behalf of her people. That's what she does today. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you a former UA Fort Smith student and graduate, current graduate, and historic preservation officer and chief historian for the Cherokee Nation, Foreman-Gray. I'm extremely proud of her, by the way. If I didn't get that across, I want to make sure you know that.
I tell everybody today that I do what I do because of this man named Tom Lee. And when I stumbled into his office, I think I was just taking an online Arkansas history class. I've always loved history, and I was born in Tahlequah, raised in the Muskogee area. It's a little town called Warner, but I just really wasn't sure what I wanted to do with that, and teaching just kind of seemed like really the only thing I could do with the history degree. So when I stumbled into his office and the historical interpretation, it was something that I had never even thought about doing. And I don't know if he knows this. Well, he does, because he called me repeatedly saying, "Are you going to go put your application in down at the historic site?" And I dragged my feet for weeks, if not months, because I just wasn't sure. I'm like, historical interpretation, like really what? I wasn't sure that that's what I wanted to do. And when I got down there, it was the best decision I had ever made in my life, was to go down there and do the internship at the Fort Smith National Historic Site. And I fell in love with the history there. I was really trying to promote the removal story of the Cherokee people on all the 5 tribes through Fort Smith and through Arkansas. And then I did catch the bug of the lawmen and outlaws, mainly because I was running across criminal case files of my own family. And it just kind of, worked into this whole obsession with outlaws and lawmen of the Cherokee Nation. So that's really what I get asked to speak about a lot, is that relationship, that jurisdictional conflict between the tribes in Indian Territory and then also the federal government. I'm actually on the board for the U.S. Marshals Museum. September 24th of this month, we'll be doing the dedication of the Hall of Honor. So if you are available, I encourage everyone to go down there for that. there is going to be some information on tribal lawmen, and our own Cherokee Nation Citizen Annual Horse Chief is currently, I've seen, it's a life-size bronze statue that we're doing with the tribal light horse on horseback. That's going to be on the grounds there at the museum. So it's going to be beautiful, and it's been exciting watching that whole process unfold as well.
What time of day does that grand opening start?
I think it's at 10 in the morning. I'll have to double check. I know there's been information on Facebook and in the media. There should be some more information on that going out there. So anyway, that's just a little bit of my background. I'm, like I said, originally from Oklahoma, and I work now as a History and Preservation Officer for the Cherokee Nation. I started off doing tours right after I left. As you mentioned, I caught the eye of Chad Smith, but he kind of knew who I was because I campaigned against him for one of my good friends, Stacey Leeds. And so,
It is a
but yeah, and tribal politics are a little. If you ever see us in the news, it gets kind of bad over there sometimes. But Chad and I we've been great friends. He's the one that hired me. So I'm on my third chief now with the Cherokee Nation. So that's good because some of us don't last past one administration sometimes. Yeah, I started off doing tours, and then I took a little bit of a break after I had my youngest son Elias. And I came back in 2012, and I love what I'm doing. I'm all over the place. I was just in San Diego this weekend. I'll be in LA this weekend. I get to go across the United States and talk about the history of the Cherokee people to all of our citizens. So thanks, Tom, for grabbing hold of me that day in the office and saying, don't change your major. So how do I work this? Is this just like a small fancy? Okay, awesome. So this is a small enough group. If you have any questions at any time, just raise your hand. You never know what kind of audience you're going to get sometimes with these presentations. Sometimes I show up and I've heard our name just completely botched as the Cherokee Indians. You just never know what you're going to get sometimes when you're going to do a presentation. So I always try to give just a brief history of our tribe and then kind of what we do today before I really dive into the subject that we're going to talk about. And I was asked to talk about the Western Cherokee Nation, or just the history in Arkansas as it relates to the Cherokee people. And we do have a significant history here in the state of Arkansas. The Western Cherokee Nation were moved here. They're also known as the Old Settlers. Starting in the late 1700s, Cherokees began to migrate west because of all the European encroachment in the southeast. So I'm going to focus on them today, but I am going to back up and fast forward a little bit through this and talk a little bit about what we do today and what is the Cherokee Nation today. We get a lot of questions on how do we function as a government and how do we fit into state and federal politics. We are one of only 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes. The other 2 are the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, the Cherokee North Carolina, and then also the United Kituwa Band of Indians in Tahlequah as well. We are a sovereign tribal government encompassing all or part of 14 counties in northeastern Oklahoma. This is a map of our jurisdiction, and it's broken down with the counties. And about half of our 350,000 citizens reside inside the boundaries of the Cherokee Nation, and the rest are scattered around the globe. My cousin, who is a Cherokee citizen, she lives in Turkey. And then also with the military, we have tons of Cherokee citizens that are just around the world. We do everything that the federal government can do except print money and raise an army. We serve our citizens with health care, housing, education, and other social services. This is what the bulk of our money, when we have our tribal casinos, or we're trying to diversify a lot of that as well, but any of the money that we receive, we don't do per capita payments that a lot of tribal nations do. We invest all of our money into health care, housing, and the infrastructure of the Cherokee government. We also have a tax commission that levies taxes on goods and services sold within the Cherokee Nation, such as car tax. We have compact agreements with the state of Oklahoma for gaming, tobacco, license plates, hunting, and fishing and motor fuels. So we had over a $2 billion impact just in northeastern Oklahoma. It says state of Oklahoma, but it's actually northeastern Oklahoma. That's how much of an impact all of our gaming makes on northeastern Oklahoma. We employ directly over 12,000 employees in northeast Oklahoma and indirect employment of over 25,000 people with contracts and things like that that we do with different companies. We also run the largest tribal healthcare system in the United States, with now that has changed to 9 clinics, a hospital, and more than 1 million patient visits per year. We also just did an agreement with OSU Medical Center, and we're going to be the first of its kind in the United States to have a tribally run medical training facility. So what we're going to do is grow our own doctors in the Cherokee Nation. So OSU Medical School is going to step in and help us with that, with helping train our citizens, and then after they graduate from the program, they will be required to spend a few years working in our healthcare clinics. So it's a good trade-off with that. We awarded last year over $6 million to schools all across the state of Oklahoma. And the one thing that schools love about us in the Cherokee Nation is that when we give them a check, we don't tell them what they have to do with it. Wherever they need to fill in the gaps with their school with that money, they're allowed to do that. So and every year this increases. So every year it's, maybe last year it was like $5 million, this year it's $6 million. Just with our casinos growing like they are, and the money that we're getting from that, it's every year this money increases. We also are a good community partner. We, for instance, in West Island Springs, because we have so many Cherokee citizens that live in northeastern Oklahoma and Oklahoma in general, we also try to be good community partners as far as making sure tornado sirens and the roads and the fire department and the police force, different partners like that have the resources that they need. And then this just kind of shows you our diverse portfolio. We have aerospace, telecommunications, healthcare, gaming and hospitality, security and defense. We have a ton of government contracts that we do, even with NASA and things like that. So it's pretty interesting when you see some of the projects that Cherokee Nation's involved with. So I'll do a really brief history for those of you who might maybe aren't that familiar with the Cherokee Nation, where we come from, and how we got to Oklahoma today, because this is not our homelands here in this area. This is our original Cherokee territory. Kentucky's claimed by a lot of different tribal nations, the Shawnee, and a number of different people that had claimed Kentucky, but it was really the hunting grounds for a lot of different tribes. There was also a lot of conflict that happened in the state of Kentucky. But it was approximately 81 million acres that encompassed most of this area that you see on this map of Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, and Alabama. And like I said, if you guys have any questions at any part of this, I'm just going to try to run through some of this fairly quickly. So at the time of European contact with DeSoto in 1540, our population was estimated to be around 25,000 people. These are communal and autonomous towns and villages. Each had its own chief and council. So this was an issue when the Europeans were first encountering the Cherokees. They didn't have one chief to deal with. Each of these hundreds of towns that were scattered throughout the southeast had their own chief, had their own council, and they made their own laws and government in these different communities. And so when one community, when one town would make an agreement with, say, the French, and maybe it impacted what was going on with the British, there was where a lot of conflict was happening between some of the towns and the Cherokee towns. So unlike some of the nomadic plains tribes, we lived a subsistence lifestyle that included farming, hunting, and gathering. So no teepees here. That's one thing you leave today with any knowledge of, didn't have any prior knowledge about the Cherokees. It's, we don't live in teepees. We don't have a Cherokee princess. There's a lot of different myths that are out there, and so those are some of the things that we try to debunk, right away. We lived in homes made of wattle and daub, mud and clay that were covered with roofs made of brush and river paint. If you go to the Cherokee Heritage Center today out in Tahlequah, we're about an hour and a half, about an hour and 45 minutes, depending on how fast you drive. You get to the Cherokee Heritage Center, There's a wonderful replica of what a Cherokee Village would have looked like around 1710. So it shows the introduction of the European trade goods, but also has the traditional, you'll see aspects of the traditional life that the Cherokees were living as well. We hold more than 40 treaties with the U.S. and Great Britain, reinforcing our status as a sovereign entity. So this is pretty much what a Cherokee Village would have looked like at the time of contact, and then for the next 150 years after that. Am I going through this a little too fast? Sure, good. So these are looking through photographs of Cherokees. It's always interesting when we get visitors to Tahlequah what their perception of what a Cherokee should look like. We show them some of these photographs. You know, you look on the left hand, the far left. This is one of the earliest photographs that we know of, a painting that was done of a trader coming in and trading with the Cherokees. We've got the Conestoga there in the center. We have Cherokees who went over into London in the 1700s who were meeting with the king over there. But it's always interesting when people come to Tahlequah and they start seeing buildings that we established after removal. And then they go out to the Heritage Center and then they see how we were living before removal and at the time of European contact. And so people get confused sometimes when they're traveling through the Cherokee Nation, I feel like, because they're trying to put all of this together. And it does get complicated, and it's a lot to digest when you're somebody coming in and you have no prior knowledge of what a tribal nation should look like. And a lot of this will get clumped in together as well. We all had different languages. We were all so unique, all of the tribal nations, across the North American continent. And so we all had our own distinct language, our own distinct culture, the way that our government functioned, the way that our societies functioned. We were a matrilineal culture. The women were regarded in a very high status. That's not always the case with some of the other tribes. Some of them were a patrilineal society. So it's interesting sometimes to see all of this, people trying to process this when they come to visit us in Tahlequah and we start throwing these images at them. As I mentioned, we are a matrilineal society, so children are born to the clan of their mother. That's specifically what that means. So, for instance, I am Bird Clan. I have 3 boys. All 3 of my boys are Bird Clan, but they are unable to pass that clan down to their children. So had I had a daughter, a tribe, but I didn't, she would have been Bird Clan as well, and she would have been able to pass that on to her children. So the clan stopped with my 3 boys unless they marry another Cherokee girl, but they can't marry inside their own clan. It's forbidden. So if they marry someone that is Wolf Clan, then my grandchildren would be Wolf Clan. Does that make sense? And these are just a list of the 7 Cherokee clans: the Wolf Clan, Bird Clan, Blue Clan, Deer, Longhair, Paint, and Wild Potato. One of the most famous Cherokees, and he's very significant to Arkansas history as well, Sequoyah. So in the early 1800s, he began developing the first written language among Native tribes, and it's called the Cherokee Syllabary. And by the year 1824, they say approximately 75% of Cherokees were literate. He did not read or write, speak, any of that in English. But he did see what the soldiers were doing when they were coming in and they were trading with the Cherokees and they were establishing these forts in the old Cherokee Nation back east. He saw that these talking leaves is what we often refer to them as, words on paper. It gave him the idea to do the same thing for his people. And so Sequoyah is probably one of our most well-known and beloved Cherokees today. And if you get a chance, his cabin is right across the border over in Sallisaw. We recently took that over from the state of Oklahoma about 2 years ago. And Sequoyah's cabin is there. I think it's only closed on Sunday and Monday. So this leads to the invention of the Cherokee Syllabary, which also prompted the establishment of the Cherokee Constitution and the Cherokee Phoenix, which was the first Native American and bilingual newspaper in the United States, and it's still in print today as well. So this term is important. How are tribal governments looked at? This is something that even today is the foundation of federal Indian law. Domestic dependent nations, what does that mean? Sometimes I like to compare us to maybe the U.S. Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico, going back to we're able to do just about anything the federal government can do except raise an army and print money. We are above state law, but we are also under federal law. And a lot of this goes back to these two important court cases called Cherokee Nation versus Georgia and Worcester versus Georgia. These were in response to a series of harassment laws that were happening at the time in the late 1820s and the early 1830s. Georgia was really the state that was trying to push the Cherokees out and exert its jurisdiction over our government, our tribal government. So in 1831 and then again in 1832, you have these court cases that really define, like I mentioned, Indian law today. And we could sit here and dissect these two cases for a while, so I won't do that. But the Marshall, the Chief Justice John Marshall, the designation of Indian tribes as domestic dependent nations, it set an important precedence for all indigenous tribal governments today. This is just a little bit of the removal timeline, going from 1802 up to 1832, with Jefferson signing the Georgia Compact. We have the Treaty of New Echota, which that right there could be an hour to 3 hour long presentation in itself. Something I'm very passionate about is that part of our history. We have a constitutional convention that's held. We establish a constitution, which drove Georgia crazy at that time. This happened in 1828. And in response to that, that's when they start enacting these harassment laws against Cherokees there. They began trying to exert their jurisdiction over us. It became illegal for us to hold council, to mine gold on our own lands there in Georgia. We were not allowed to testify in court. So this is some of the reasons why Cherokees begin to migrate west and leave the southeastern part of the United States. A lot of this happens a little bit earlier on, but especially in the 1820s, you see a lot of Cherokees that begin to move south or move west here into Arkansas and then also Indian Territory. Here's some removal routes, the Trail of Tears. A lot of people look at this as maybe one route that was taken sometimes, but it is a series of different routes, is how we ended up getting over into Indian Territory. Some of these are land routes, some of these are water routes. Not well looked at. I mean, not a big fan of Jackson, most Cherokees are. We actually did save his life at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend when we allied with him against some Muscogee Creeks there. But he had favored Indian removal from its conception. He's the president that openly defies the U.S. Supreme Court. So when John Marshall had made the decision and called us domestic dependent nations, it was Jackson who said that Marshall had made his decision, now let him enforce it. And basically all this did was fuel the fire for the state of Georgia to push out the Cherokees. Jackson did nothing to try to protect or uphold that Supreme Court decision. So the Treaty of New Echota is important in our history, just because you have the split that begins to happen with the Cherokee leaders who are trying to determine what is best for the Cherokee people going forward. Should we remove as a nation and go west? It's going to happen anyway. The majority of Cherokee people were against this. Our history is so complex and complicated, and as somebody who's been studying it for 20 years, I still feel like I learn something new every day. And so I know I'm throwing a lot at you out there right now, but these are just some of these topics that I'm throwing out. If you are interested in Cherokee history and the culture of our people, these are just some things to remember when you're going back and trying to digest everything I'm throwing at you right now within an hour. So, but these are some of the important individuals that are involved with that treaty. And all of these men, but one of them up here, Stan Wady, all of them end up getting brutally killed because they signed what's called the Treaty of New Chota. And that happened on December 29th of 1835. And this is the last cession of land for that. Here in it was a smaller portion of this, but this is the original. I think that's supposed to play, but sorry. So, we're going to start getting into Arkansas and talking a little bit about our history here. And when you bring up Arkansas and Cherokees, there's a lot of roles that were, I think there's over 40 roles in censuses that Cherokees are on that start documenting the Cherokees early on in the 1800s. This roll specifically, 1835 Henderson roll, it lists approximately 16,000 Cherokees living in the east who are to be removed west to Indian Territory. The reason why this roll is important is because these rolls are all usually connected to a piece of land or are connected to a payment. And so when you're documenting any kind of your genealogy and you're looking for any information on maybe some Cherokee ancestry, this is an important role to look at. So we always try to make sure that this is up there because this is going to document your ancestors in the East if they were there.
Is this available online?
This is available online. It should be on, if you do Fold3 or Ancestry.com, it should be up there. Which is free through libraries. So if you try to purchase a membership online, I think Ancestry is around $200 a year, depending on which membership you get. But the nice thing about the libraries is that they're free. The Fort Smith Library is great as far as the information that they have on the Cherokee rolls. They have a wonderful genealogy department down there. The historic sites got some great information when you're wanting to dive in a little bit more on some history. But this library, I'm not sure what they have, but they should have access to all of this online. And these are just some statistics on the detachments. Approximately 16,000 are removed. All of these detachments will be coming through Arkansas at one point. And so Cherokee life in Indian Territory, we try to reestablish, we have the male and female seminaries. The female was one of the first institutions of higher learning for women. Today that institution is Northeastern State University. We have our courthouses that we constructed after removal, and we have our 3 branches of government which we still operate under today. Reestablished our newspaper, and then today this is how we decide who is going to be a Cherokee citizen and get that card. But it is very, it's a lot more complicated than that, so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So back to the Western Cherokee Nation, or Old Settlers, we're going to back up here a little bit. So as I mentioned, Cherokees began removing west because of all the European encroachment that's happening in the southeast. And when these Cherokees are removing west, because we start in the east, start coming under a more centralized government. When we're electing one chief, he's going to have complete say-so over all of the Cherokee government in all of the towns. These Cherokees who are removing west to escape a lot of the Cherokee encroachment are still trying to carry on the traditional government of the Cherokees, which consisted of a red and white government, which means you have a war chief and a peace chief. So depending on what's going on in the society that's impacting the Cherokee people at that time, it's going to decide what chief is going to be in command or in control. This map right here that you see, this is the land that was originally given to the Western Cherokee Nation, the Old Settlers. You'll hear them called both. There's an Old Settler roll. They were officially designated and called the Western Cherokee Nation, but once they get over into Indian territory, and once the main removal group, all the removal groups end up in Indian territory, they become referred to as the old settlers, meaning those who came before. This is a well-known chief at the time, Tachi, or the Dutch. He was also a good friend of Sam Houston, which at one point he completely abandons U.S. politics and he comes over into the Cherokee, the Western Cherokee Nation, and he lives with us, marries the chief's sister. He's adopted into the Cherokees. He's actually got a pretty colorful history with our people. He was a big advocate of Cherokees who continue, these Western Cherokees, these old settlers, after they come into Indian territory in Oklahoma, they start trying to go even further south because they're just continuously trying to escape all of the Cherokee encroachment. And so we end up in conflicts down in Texas, even down in Mexico, and Sam Houston was a big advocate for trying to help us gain land down there. So this photo was actually, well, it wouldn't have been a photograph at the time, but it was at, it's in Thai. What was it called? This was actually taken near Russellville, Arkansas. The original Dwight Richards is here, not too far from Fort Smith. And it was forced, they were forced to leave in 1828 and cede the last cession of land and move over into Indian territory. But this was taken in 1824 and it was drawn by Reverend Hitchcock. So missionaries are a complicated and controversial part of our history as well. We have our own religion that we say that we got from the Creator. Cherokees believe in a higher power. We believe that He is good, and the way that we worship that is to go to the ceremonial grounds or the stomp grounds. And when you go to the grounds, some people, especially people who were unfamiliar with our way of life, when they saw the way that we were worshiping, it was often called, looked at very disapprovingly, and people didn't understand why we would dance around the fire and worship it. So what we're doing is that fire is very important to the Cherokees. We are people of the fire. When we talk about our history and how the oral history of how fire came to the Cherokee people, there's a story about the water spider. When you go back and you're looking at indigenous cultures in North America, you'll see the spider represented. If you go to Cahokia, if you look at any mounds in the southeast, if you go north and look at any of the mounds, maybe in the Ohio Valley, you'll see this little water spider that's often represented in a lot of our indigenous cultures. And it's important because oral history tells us that that little spider is what brought fire to the people. And you'll often see this fire represented in the form of a cross, and then you'll also see it in these different, if you look at the book, Sun Circles in Human Hands, there's a lot of great symbolism in that book that talks about especially Indians of the Southeast and the symbolism that's very important to us. But when Europeans are looking at this and they don't understand, women are in charge, they have complete charge of the family and what goes on in the society. They're dancing around a fire. This was a lot for Europeans to try to take in and understand. We also had what was called the blood law or the clan law. It was just too much for the Europeans to take in, and a lot of it was just considered witchcraft to send people at some points in our history. But when you go out to the stomp grounds today, it's a complex way to try to navigate through the world as far as Christianity, because we have a lot of Cherokees who are Christians. And Christianity is one of the ways that our language has survived this long. But we also try to continue on that path of what the Creator, the religion, the spirituality that He gave us. So missionaries are definitely a controversial part of our history, and it's not always good. If you are interested in this part of our history, I always encourage people to read the Moravian diaries. They're fascinating. They're also frustrating for us as Indigenous people to read because they continuously call us heathens. They are trying to understand what our religion is like and how they can change that. So it is frustrating for some of us to read, but it also gives great insight and how we were living at that time period. So I always encourage people to read those Moravian diaries if you're interested in that part of our history. So this is another map. You see this number 37. This is some original Cherokee lands here in Arkansas. And then we also have the red and green that's over in northeastern Oklahoma. You'll see this little yellow strip at the top where it says 39, and then also 38. A lot of people forget that we also used to have those pieces of land as well. So this one up here is called the Cherokee Strip. So if you ever hear that term, that's where it comes from. It's this little strip of land that we had up there. And I do want to point out, this is all Osage land for the most part. So the federal government comes in, and what's interesting, even today, you look at the different cultures in Oklahoma. We have 39 federally recognized tribes in the state of Oklahoma, and most of us aren't from there. Most of this is Osage, Caddo, Quapaw, the homelands of the tribes out here. And there was a lot of conflict. That's why you have Fort Smith to begin with in 1817, because of the conflict that's going on between the Cherokees and the Osage. It was the Western Cherokee, the Western Cherokees, or the old settlers. People forget sometimes that these are also Chickamauga Cherokee warriors. So these are people who have fought along some of the greatest warriors of our time, namely Dragging Canoe. He's revered in our history as one of the last great warriors of our people to really stand up and rally against the Europeans and try to fight against all this encroachment. He wanted to create this huge Indian confederacy with Tecumseh and just try to take down all of the Europeans. So a lot of these men, a lot of these families that are coming over into Arkansas and moving into Indian Territory, these are the remnants of that. These are people who had followed Dragging Canoe and who had fought alongside of him. So when you read some of the accounts that are happening between the Cherokees and the Osage here, some of it's brutal. Some of it's pretty, when you look at just the Battle of Claremont Mound and some of the stuff that some of the Cherokees are doing to some of the Osage out here, it's pretty ruthless. So people forget sometimes who these people were.
Did you say Dragon Canoe?
Yes.
Okay, is there any other name for him, or is that the one and only?
I'm trying to remember what his Cherokee name was. He got his name for, he wanted to go out on they were going out on a hunting trip or something like that, and supposedly you couldn't go until you could drag your own canoe or bring your own canoe with you. And so he got his name because he was dragging his canoe with him as a little boy.
Did he relocate to Oklahoma or?
No, he was killed before all of this. So, but these are some of the same men who are we call them the Chickamauga Cherokees. And they were living, when you look at a map, they're down mainly in Alabama, West Georgia, that area of the old Cherokee Nation. And it's, that part of our history is complicated as well because you have people who are advocating for peace, namely a woman named Nancy Ward, who we don't know if that's Dragging Canoe's sister or first cousin, just because of how the matrilineal relationship works. But she's advocating for peace, and she actually begins to warn some of the different villages that Dragging Canoe and his men and the Chickamauga Cherokees are going to attack these villages. So that's even, some people call her a traitor, but she's also called the beloved woman of the Cherokee.
Was the Red Sticks, is this in this time?
Yes. So and the Red Sticks are, they're the ones who are fighting against this European encroachment as well. And this is where Cherokees become split early on as far as some of that history. When you look back on our history, it seems to continuously be a split sometimes between the traditional people. We even have it at statehood. You have the Nighthawk Kituas, who are anti-federal government. They are refusing to enroll on any kind of role that's going to take a census or any kind of documentation of the people. in preparation for statehood and allotment. But you also have Cherokees who are advocating for it sometimes. And then there's a lot of Cherokees who try to find the balance in the middle ground with all of it going on. So there's always these divisions, it seems like, when you're looking throughout our history of the traditional faction and some that maybe were a little bit more progressive. It's the same thing with removal. You had those who were looking at removal differently. So it was the same thing that was happening at this time as well. So this just shows some of the earlier, or the specific areas of the 1817 treaty. So what happens, and we see this throughout our history, here's some land, you can stay there for as long as the water flows and the grass grows, right? And then here comes folks wanting the land. It's the same thing. It's what happened with Indian Territory, the state of Oklahoma. Here's some land, let's put all the Indians there because nobody wants this land. Oh, oil's discovered, so now everybody wants it. But it's just the same story. It was that way in Arkansas, it was that way in Indian Territory, it was that way in the East. But this just shows a little bit of the specific areas of land cessions, of land that was ceded to the United States back east in 1817, and then also in Arkansas. So what begins to happen is this is when the federal government starts saying, hey, maybe we can pit these Indians against each other and start creating division. What you see happen a lot is we're going to give you this much money, we're going to give you this much land, you have to give up Cherokee citizenship and become a United States citizen. You see a lot of that begin to happen in these areas in the East, namely in Tennessee is where it happens a lot. And what happens is they end up getting removed anyway. And then they have to readmit and reapply for Cherokee citizenship. We could do a whole genealogy session just on how complicated that portion of our history is when it comes to Cherokees that had to be readmitted into the Cherokee Nation because they had given up citizenship at one point. In the Treaty of 1817, so a lot of those that did leave in 1817 from Tennessee, they end up coming over here to Arkansas at that same time in this Treaty of 1817. So you'll see a lot of those people, and I throw all this out there because genealogy is one of our most popular topics and something that people are always researching, Cherokee genealogy. This Treaty of 1817 is important because if you go back and you're looking at relatives who maybe were in Arkansas and then you see them in Tennessee, maybe even at the same time, this is what's happening at that point in our history. They're giving up land in Tennessee to come over here into Arkansas. And the same thing begins to happen in 1819. You have land cessions in Tennessee, and a lot of those people are coming over into Arkansas as well. This is one of the signers of a treaty who took a 640-acre reserve. We have our own people who were trying to profit off of removal, so and all these land cessions. So we're not immune to being dazzled by the federal government, either. So when you look at some of these individuals, he was also a Cherokee chief, but he's also criticized for some of the decisions that he made as well. I throw this picture up there because I just love the way he looks. And I think it's great to kind of see what an old settler Cherokee would have looked like. One thing that we do try to point out, though, that during all of this, so when you have your treaties of 1817, of 1819, you were given the option, as I mentioned, to give up citizenship. You were able to say, I'm going to accept this 640 acres here in Tennessee, and I'm going to relinquish my Cherokee citizenship, and I'm going to become a United States citizen. That had a lot of consequences, stuff that we are still living with today, because we know there are a lot of people out there that have Cherokee ancestry, however, are unable to become citizens of the Cherokee Nation today. It's because of the acts of some of your ancestors who decided at one point in time that they were no longer Cherokee. Obviously, we have people who were even full-blood at that time. that are making this decision. I never try to judge them for making the decision that they made. You know, you have a family to support, you have a great crop in there, you don't want to leave, things are good. Nobody's really messing with you where you're at. The benefits of being an Indian at that time, I don't think anybody was really thinking about that. You have a lot of the politicians who were, they're looking at it as a, who start having the forward thinking at that point of a sovereign government, because we had made treaties with the British government, and now we're going to make, now we're making them with the United States government. You have politicians who are thinking about that, but your average everyday Cherokee family is not really, that's not a big weight on them at that point.
Catherine, I want to ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Could you foresee a day when that situation might change with DNA and some of the other things that we are having access to as far as proving ancestry?
Well, the one thing, so when you do a DNA test, and it's been something that I have encountered good and bad with it. So there's people who have continuously claimed that, they had their Cherokee grandma, and then they go and do the DNA test, not one drop of Native ancestry. And then people who didn't know anything about having any Native ancestry in their family, and then they find out that there's Native American. And then for some reason, people automatically assume it's Cherokee. We receive more requests than any other tribe. But Native American, when you look at it on the DNA test, it's going all the way from, Canada to the tip of South America. That's what's considered Native American. So if you had any ancestors that are, they could have came up from, your fourth great grandmother could have been, her dad could have been from Mexico. I don't know. It's just all of that is going to impact those DNA. I honestly don't think there was a full-blooded Cherokee even in 1700, because the way that our tribe functioned, we took war captives, we adopted so many other people into our tribe. It's just, we know that we adopted Natchez people. We know that there's a lot of people from the Tuscaroras. Our language is the only language of all the southeastern tribes that's an Iroquois-based language. So at some point, we're in the northeastern part of the United States, present-day United States. So it's, I think maybe the only ones that you could ever determine, possibly DNA, as far as even getting down to tribes, would even be the Pacific Northwest or somewhere out there. It's so complicated. It's something that I've even had to really study up on, trying to understand how the DNA works. So, my DNA, if I had a daughter, it would pretty much get cut in half, the racial makeup of that result. But with my boys, it's just going to pick and choose, with it going from a female line to a male line. I had cousins who took this DNA test. My cousin David, he is a full-blood Cherokee. He has 2 girls. He married a white woman, and they have 2 girls. So the first results of the DNA test of the youngest came up as like 41%. Her sister took the DNA test, and it came up like 28%. So we're all looking at my cousin Sherry like, hey, what's going on here? Because Jacqueline's is like almost half of what Katie's is, but she's still over a quarter Native American, is what it's saying on the result. So I had a genealogist really break it down for me, and somebody who specializes in this, and her name is Anita Smith, and she does genealogy for the Eastern Band, who does use DNA testing, but it's only to determine the biological parents. And she was the one that explained how David, my cousin, having 2 daughters, the DNA is just kind of randomly pulled from his. And that's why my cousin, who's 41%, she's got the dark eyes, the dark hair, the olive complexion. Jacqueline, the other one, who's 28% or whatever it is, she's fair complected, light brown eyes, things like that. So it was, it's interesting how DNA does that. Now, had David had a son, he probably would have inherited exactly half of what, he probably would have looked like a little miniature David. So it's just, it's interesting how that all works. But we took in so many war captives. We absorbed so many different tribes. We have a wonderful archaeologist that we work with. His name is Dr. Brett Riggs. He's over at the University of, he's over at Western Carolina in North Carolina, and he talks about how remnants, as an archaeologist, they find remnants of one culture outside what our tribal jurisdiction was. And this is the last that they've ever been able to find of maybe these people. But then that same material culture will show up within the Cherokee Nation like maybe 50 years later. He's like, what you did is absorb these people into the Cherokee Nation. And so with the language, I think we took people in. If you were willing to learn our language to become part of us, then you were considered Cherokee. And that's the way it has always been with a lot of our, throughout a lot of our history. It becomes a problem now because sometimes when we look at that, well, that's not traditional way of thinking. We always say that all the time. Oh, well, you're not thinking traditional. But what happens now is a lot of people try to take advantage of that. So when we have people that try to come in and learn our history, learn our culture, and become part of us, sometimes they automatically get labeled as a wannabe. So it's complicated and definitely complex how we've evolved even with our thinking traditionally, how we do it today with the DNA and what makes a Cherokee as far as blood relationship. I don't know how much time I've got here either, so I'm just kind of rambling on. I don't even know what time it is. If you need to leave, I guess go. I'll just continue talking. But, so Sequoyah, I've mentioned him a little bit, George Guest. He moved here in 1824, and he was one of the signers of his treaty of 1828. And he later died in Mexico. There's a big search for him right now. There's a documentary that we're doing called Searching for Sequoyah. Some people say he was already found and brought back earlier, and some people say that he was left there down at the border of Mexico. So we don't know. So, to kind of reiterate, going back to this whole, what makes a Cherokee at this time, both in the 1827 and 1839 Cherokee Nation constitutions, it says that whenever any such citizen or citizens shall remove with their effects out of the limits of this nation and become citizens of any other government, all their rights and privileges as citizens of this nation cease, provided nevertheless the legislature shall have power to readmit by law all the rights of citizenship to any such person or persons who may at any time desire to return to this nation by memorializing the General Council for such readmission. So anyone's Cherokee ancestors who chose not to return to the Cherokee Nation or who were not readmitted as citizens made the conscious decision to do so. I want to make sure that people read this and see this and always kind of absorb it, because we get criticized all the time. Why don't we allow people into our tribe? And we always just try to stress the fact that it was your ancestors who made that decision, and we have to have a limit. We have to have something that today that's the Dawes rule. We have to have, if we make exceptions here, then it just opens the floodgates for everything else. I've met so many people that have Cherokee ancestry who are descended from some very prominent Cherokees back east, that they're not eligible for citizenship today. And I know how frustrating that can be for some people. And it's something that when you finally educate yourself on a lot of this part of our history, because I was probably, you asked me 15 years ago, I was one of those Cherokees that were like, oh, they're just claiming it. They don't have any Cherokee by blood. They're just a wannabe. But when you start really looking into, how complicated this issue was at that time, why were people giving up citizenship in the Cherokee Nation? It's one that's very complicated at that time. And it's not for us, I feel like, to judge why they made that decision.
Is anyone still around today? I mean, do they go through the process?
Yes. And so today we have what's called the Dawes Final Roll. And now, if your ancestor didn't make it on the Dawes Roll, I'm usually of the opinion that they probably weren't they most likely weren't Cherokee. Because those who did not enroll on the Dawes final roll were usually enrolled by someone else, by another family. The Dawes Commission, when they come in and they're going to take this survey of all 5 tribes here in Indian Territory, and they're going to make sure that every Cherokee has a piece of land. That's what the Dawes roll is. It's that number is tied to a piece of land somewhere in Oklahoma. And they were paying people to go out into these different Cherokee communities to enroll families who were refusing to enroll. So a good friend of mine, he's passed on, Jason Hamilton, his family, who were the Christie family, were one of the most traditional Cherokee families of the Cherokee Nation at this time, and they were called the Nighthawk Katuas, and they all refused to go and enroll and accept allotment from the federal government. However, that entire family was enrolled by some neighbors down the road who were paid by the Dawes Commission, just so that they made sure that they didn't miss anybody. If they did miss people, they were added on later in 1910. So any children, maybe someone was pregnant, hadn't had a child yet, and the Dawes Commission's coming around and saying 1902, in 1910, these individuals would have been later added who had lived, who were in Indian Territory up until 1908. Does that make sense? And that's what we use as our basis today for citizenship. So you have to have an ancestor on that Dawes final roll to be considered Cherokee. The United Katuah Band uses the exact same roll. They just have a blood quantum. And there's a lot of us there's a lot of people that are dual enrolled. You just have to be 1/4 to be United Katuah Band. There are tribes who are against dual enrollment though. Cherokee Nation doesn't have anything against it, but the UK can do. They just don't need to find out sometimes. Active union is important because one of the things that you see us, you'll see us in the news all the time, constantly criticizing state government, state tribal governments. There's one that we were in the news recently, I'll just go ahead and throw it out there, I hope I don't offend anybody. The Western Cherokee Nation, who established itself in Fort Smith even, was calling themselves the Western Cherokee Nation after the Western Cherokee Nation that had originally lived here. So in 1839, after the removal, after the Trail of Tears, you have the old settlers, the Western Cherokee Nation living in Indian Territory. You have the Eastern Cherokees is what they're called at the time, those who were moved on the Trail of Tears. There's a lot of conflict that's going on between these two groups because the Western Cherokee Nation is saying, we're here already, we already have our government established, you all need to just form under it. But you have 16,000 Cherokees. They outnumber the Western Cherokee Nation, 4-1. So it wasn't something that the Western Cherokee Nation really wanted to do, but they really didn't have a choice. They signed what's called the Act of Union, which puts both of the tribes under one body politic of the Cherokee Nation. So there is this Act of Union. Like I said, not all sides were happy about it, but they did sign it. And it puts us all under the Cherokee Nation. So when you have groups that try to reestablish themselves as the Western Cherokee Nation, it's something I used to be afraid to talk about, but it's something that our administration has told us that we need to definitely confront. So it's been a little hard because I hate confrontation. But we do just try to make sure that how people understand. We're not saying that there are people out there that don't have Cherokee blood. It's just when it comes to government, that's a whole nother ballgame. And what happens, you see these groups splinter a lot, and they take the resources, and it's taking away from other Native tribes and people who need it. So it's a complicated history with some of that, but it's something that we definitely have to address. These are some of the rolls and censuses. All of these should at some point connect to Arkansas. If any of you guys are interested in any of these. I don't know how many out here do genealogy, but it's our #1 topic, so.
my grandma was, in Oklahoma in the Ardmore.
Mhm.
In 1896, my dad was born. In 1900, when they started with the Dawes Commission rolls, started searching the state and taking rolls, she gave herself as Black Dutch. And they moved. They came back to Fort Smith in 1900 or 1901, somewhere in there. She wouldn't sign up for nothing.
Yeah.
She claimed that her tribe owned Jonesboro, Arkansas. But that's all lost, That's history. But it didn't show that on the map, Jonesboro. It showed from a White River. She was further east.
So those early Cherokees who start coming west, there's not really any, we know that there were Cherokees coming into Arkansas in the late 1700s. There's just not a lot of, there's not any kind of organized documentation on them. They start to get there in around 1808, 1810. Our Cherokees talk about.
Well, they didn't
The
have a
Mandarin.
written language. There's no way to document it.
Well, I'm just saying by or you know what I mean, by any of the explorers who were coming through, or the towns, or any of that that's being established. We do know, because there is record of when the New Madrid earthquake happens. That's why a lot of Cherokees leave northeast Arkansas at that time. And to be honest, they thought it was something that these Chickamauga Cherokees, who were very, when you look back on some of their, they seem to be very superstitious with a lot of, they think that this is in retaliation for not trying to join with Tecumseh and fight the European encroachment. It's very interesting, some of that happens around 1810. But we do know that there were Cherokees in northeast Arkansas at some point. They just began migrating over, but it's not until 1817 that we actually start having this 1817 reservation roll.
Yeah, she was there, according to her, but she died in 1935.
Yeah.
But according to her history, her grandpa was Olawati, which was called Samuel Smith by the missionaries.
Yeah.
That she was there long before they had a lady chief, they were old settlers.
Yeah, and I would like, if you are, looking at this time period, I would definitely look at the community that they're with, because you will see the Cherokee people move in communities and groups together. So when one family decides to move, usually that whole community is moving together. And if for some reason an ancestor is missed, I stress that if for some reason an ancestor is not on a roll somewhere, the entire family's not missed. Somebody's brother or sister or aunt or uncle or grandparent, somebody in that family unit is going to end up on a roll somewhere. Even on the Dawes Commission, there's maybe a handful of people that were missed by the Dawes Commission, but those Cherokees ended up usually marrying another Cherokee, or you can just skip that ancestor. Usually those people were missed because they were young, or they were older and maybe 18 or 19 and had moved off or something. But usually you can document, you can still become a citizen, because you can usually skip that generation and say, oh, well, my grandfather, who was 19 at the time of Oklahoma statehood, is not on it, but his parents were. So we do allow for that jump on the Dawes roll, that if someone is missed, you can go up to the parent. Does that make sense? So.
Well, I wasn't worried about the roles.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying for those who are interested in that documentation on that. So, anyway, any other questions on this? Yeah.
Not a question on the old settlers, but a topic that's been in the national news recently is, I believe the Cherokee Nation now has representation in Congress.
And I think I put it on my other, because this isn't my right PowerPoint. I didn't realize that until halfway through. But I actually discussed it. So in the Treaty of New Echota in 1835, Article 7, it says that we are allowed a delegate to Congress. And we are actually, we're pushing that, we're pressing that issue for the first time. Our chief, Chief Hoskin, and Kim Teehee are in DC this week actually, to discuss that. So that's going to be interesting to see how Congress feels with that, because we are entitled. We are made to uphold these treaties. We are forced to adhere to the 1866 treaty. Well, the 1866 treaty reaffirms everything that was in the 1835 removal treaty. And Article 7 says that Cherokees are entitled to a delegate in the House of Representatives. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Is Congress, is the federal government going to acknowledge this? Now, we won't have a vote, but we will have a voice. We feel like it's important that we still have a voice in those committee meetings. So it's going to be interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because, like I said, I realized halfway through that this was the wrong PowerPoint. But yeah, it's Article 7. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes.
What kind of current treaties would the Cherokee Nation have with Britain?
So the last treaty we made with Britain was, before the American Revolution.
Oh, okay.
So, but the U.S. government was supposed to acknowledge, they do acknowledge those treaties with Great Britain. And then we start making treaties with the U.S. federal government. We support it. So it's kind of funny. Every year, July 4th rolls around, the Cherokees they supported the British. Like, we were flying the British flag. And so we didn't support this whole revolution of the Americans because they were just coming and taking over. And at least Great Britain was trying to do something about it. They were really trying to keep their people out of Cherokee country. So, but it's always interesting. I always wear this, I recently, this last year, bought a shirt that's called, in the Declaration of Independence, it refers to us as savages and ruthless. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Anyway, so I wear it every year on 4th of July because it causes vicious Indian savages. And it's in the Declaration of Independence. So I just try to throw that out there. It's kind of interesting to see Cherokees. Some will fly the British flag, some will fly the American flag. And some people get offended though, too, when you see that. And you have to kind of put your mindset in. Us, we just try to make a joke out of everything sometimes. So it's the only way we can get through some of our own political craziness at times is to make a joke about it. So, but yeah. Any other questions?
Do y'all still respect the tradition of not marrying within your clans?
Yes. Well,
Pretty strict?
it's not, it used to be, you could be put to death for it. But I do know other people who have married into the same clan. It's advised still, if you're acted out at the ceremonial grounds, it's definitely still something that you should follow. But there's not a lot of us that have a clan anymore. So it's easy to lose. My cousins who are half Cherokee, they don't have a clan because their dad, who's a full blood, married a white woman. And as a matrilineal society, you can't pass that down. And it used to be that was who determined if you were a Cherokee or not. If your mom wasn't Cherokee, you were not considered a Cherokee. And that law doesn't change until 1825.
So is there a name for the group of people that don't have a clan?
Usually people will identify themselves as daughter or granddaughter. Like I know my cousin Katie, who is active at the grounds, she calls herself daughter of Bird Clan, is how she will often refer to herself. So usually you'll see them do that. I feel like I ran through so much today. It's so complicated.
Y'all enjoy that?